Hey, this is Matthew Lilly. Welcome to the Presence Pioneers podcast.
This is Matthew Lilly. Welcome to the Presence Pioneers podcast. I've got Niko Peele back with us today on the podcast for the second time. Niko is the founder of Ignite Movement and campus ministry network that is helping to see prayer, worship, outreach, missions, unity on college campuses around America, especially in the Southeast. And Niko's a good friend of mine, has been for years, and excited to have him back on the podcast today. If you're new to the podcast, the Presence Pioneers podcast exists to equip presence-centered communities to worship and pray night and day. And so we are aimed at communities such as houses of prayer and burn 24/7 furnaces, praying churches, prayer groups, even campus prayer groups, those who are pursuing the presence of God. So if you're a worshiper, an intercessor, a leader, then this is for you. And would love to invite you to subscribe to the podcast if you have not yet. You can subscribe via email on our website at podcast.presencepioneers.org. Of course, you can subscribe in whatever you use to listen to your podcast or on YouTube. All the links are up on our website, as well as previous episodes, show notes, and information about our ministry. And anything you can do to get the word out about this podcast would be great. If you can share it, if you can like things and review things on your podcast player on Apple, anything like that would be great to help us get the word out, encourage and strengthen the prayer movement. If these episodes help you, then they would probably be a blessing to your community that you're a part of. So if you can share it with them, that would be amazing. Thanks so much for those of you who already do that. All right. Well, Niko, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
Yes, sir. Awesome. So part two, if you missed the last episode, I would encourage you to go listen to it. We got to hear some of Niko's story and the journey God took him on, where he was seeing amazing revival on his college campus in the middle of nowhere, Eastern North Carolina at Chowan University. And God really used him as a presence pioneer, really to see amazing things happen on that campus, and surprised him by launching him out into campus ministry as a campus missionary, and now leads Ignite Movement, which is impacting multiple campuses, and they have communities all over, especially the Southeast U.S. So it's amazing what God is doing, seeing salvation, seeing unity on these campuses. And so I want to talk a little bit about young people. I mean, not everyone who listens to this podcast is going to be engaged with campuses. And so I'd love to get some thoughts, Niko, on what can those who are not on college campuses do? You know, how do we, and I'll throw out a number of questions. You can take this wherever you want. But I mean, how do we see the next generation engage in the prayer movement? You know, how do we see the baton get passed? You know, how does our ceiling become their floor? All these things we've been praying and have been prophesied that's going to happen. You know, how do we do that? If you have any thoughts on, you know, maybe how older people can relate to the younger generation. I mean, people are talking about Generation Z and the sort of this, you know, after the millennials who are kind of getting a little older, you know, there's this Gen Z that is kind of in, you know, the early years of college and high school right now. Their personalities, you know, the way they think of the world is different. And so I don't know. I've just been thinking a lot about how we see this thing continue, and how we see this move of God continue to grow, and how do we disciple the next generation? So I just kind of threw out a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on some of those things?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say, I think it is very, very important for the generations to be connected with each other, and to be walking and moving together. And those things just don't just organically happen. I think it really requires intentionality. And so really it's very easy to stay, to be comfortable in our own groups or whatever. And, but it does require stepping out of our comfort zone and and pursuing one another. And I would just say with Ignite Movement being, we work with college students and young people, but we're a very young movement. We're about 5-6 years old. And when we first started, it was one of the first words that the Lord spoke to us. It's like, if you're going to go for this, I want you to go for it with bringing the generations together. Isaiah 6 here talks about rise and shine, for your light has come, for the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. And the verse before that, it says, I'll put my words in your mouth, and your children's mouth, and your children's mouth. Arise and shine, for your light has come. And so I believe to see the fullness of God's glory being manifested in our day, it requires bringing Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob generation together. And so one of the first things I'll say when it comes to how we bridge that gap, I think the first is just really is authenticity, and truly being who you are, and not trying to, change how you dress or how you look, which I see a lot of that. I see a lot of older people, I really don't think that's necessary. I think most young people, when they see that, they realize what you're doing, I remember I was at some gathering with this guy with this like interesting looking shirt, and one of the students looked at him, and one of the students looked at his friend and was like, what is this guy wearing? And the other guy responded, was like, he's just trying to appeal to millennials. So I really like, they see that, they see you're trying, So I just say honestly, just be who you are. Don't try to, change how you dress or anything like that. Just be authentic. And I believe, our generation are looking for people to pour into their lives, looking for people to speak truth in their lives, and beyond just pure level discipleship, and so very practical, another very practical thing is let's say the older generation being very attentional and inviting young people into their lives, inviting them into their homes, inviting them for coffee, and really, I know it doesn't have to be the traditional open your Bible study, I believe discipleship, it looks like that sometimes, and sometimes it looks like taking someone grocery shopping with you, and but there is a real craving for that. And so those are just two things: authenticity, the intentionality of reaching out to young people, inviting them into your lives. I think as far as churches and communities, I think the truth of the whole gospel, preaching the whole gospel. And I say that because we run into so many students on campuses that they know how to pray and they know how to read their Bible, and they just do all that really well. But when you start talking about, certain social issues, you see the lack of a biblical worldview, primarily because the church hadn't been talking about those issues and showing how the gospel is the solution, the answer to those issues. And so we're seeing a lot of students beginning to run and being to these other groups, and so I believe just really creating safe places for conversations, and also presenting the whole gospel, where is from creation to the garden, I mean to a new heaven, the new earth, and how Jesus really has that through Jesus Christ, that the church really is the solution, that we not only can offer physical bread, but also the bread of life, physical water, but also Jesus, the living water. And I think those are things that young people are really aching to hear about, that they're not hearing from the church.
Wow, that's great, man. So authenticity, intentionality, whole gospel. I love it, man. I had an interesting dream. I don't know, maybe in the last couple of months here, and it was connected to this movement conference that's happening at the end of the year. But in the dream, there was a gathering, and it was like an auditorium, and it had 3 sections in the crowd, and each section was a different generation. So like all the older people were in one section. It was kind of this middle, almost millennial kind of generation in the middle, and then the younger, like kind of high school, emerging generation, Gen Z in the other. And the guy up front was introducing each generation. And as that generation, so he'd introduce one, they'd stand up, and the other ones would cheer for those generations.
Wow.
And it really just struck my heart of God's desire for us to cheer one another on, rather than to compete or even to isolate ourselves. And so I just feel like that this is an important thing that God's wanting to do. I mean, when you think about John 17, I mean, Jesus prayed we'd be one, like, crazy prayer on so many levels. But I mean, sometimes we think denominationally, sometimes we think racially, but part of that is generational too, where we have young and old together. And in many ways, that's a huge hurdle that we have to get over as the church.
Mm-hmm. It's good.
But I think that you're right. I think sincerity is huge. I'm glad you said that, and it's encouraging to me to know that that's still something that's being longed for in younger generations. I'm old enough to remember when I was in youth group how people would just try to do all sorts of tricks and gags and sort of silly stuff to try to attract the youth.
Yeah.
The youth. And so much of it was just silly and fake, but there's something so appealing about some, being real, being authentic. What are you seeing? I mean, we're on the verge of this, 20 years of what I consider to be the global prayer movement.
Yeah.
Where in a large part, there's been, young people who God catches in their 20s, teens, young adults. A lot of those young adults are getting older. A lot of them are millennials who've been a part of houses of prayer and sort of leading the charge. How are you seeing? Are you seeing any differences? I'm just wondering. Have you seen any shifts, even since you've been doing this, in recent years, in terms of how young people are responding to that call? Is there still an interest? Is there something that's changing? Is the way they want to engage with the Lord or pray change? I mean, does that make sense? Are you seeing any differences in sort of maybe considered Gen Z versus how things have looked in the last 20 years?
Yeah. Well, I'm still trying to learn more about Gen Z. Honestly, they're sophomores in college now. I really think the biggest thing is community and family. I think there's less of an interest of big conferences and gatherings, and more of the more intimate settings that whether it's we're seeing a lot of meetings in homes, in dorm rooms, and a lot of more of that. And so I think really creating those type of space where not only that they can able to build community with people, but also experience the presence of God in a very tangible way. Not saying they can't do that in larger events, but it's also the sense of being activated in their giftings as well. The whole priesthood of believers that can be better facilitated and more smaller, intimate family settings than big conferences and gatherings. But we do see. I do see more of an interest in that, and also just really the culture of the morality of how Christians are living is something that I'm finding among both millennials and Generation Z is really finding a really interest in, because it's very, very countercultural to the world, and then they hear stories of Christian communities who are, guys who are keeping each other accountable when it comes to purity and pornography, and to them they're like, this is crazy, because they're so used to such a fluid sexuality, and they hear stories like that. They hear stories about how communities are like forgiveness and fighting to walk in an unoffendable heart, and all those things like that. Just really the way of Jesus that believers are called to live. I'm seeing a lot of young people really being interest in just the way Christian live, like really fascinated by it. And so I think just for Christian communities, it is to, instead of, trying to, I think the temptation is trying to be relevant and to fit in, to attract unbelievers, and honestly, I believe the answer is the Bible, is what Jesus told us to do and how Jesus called us to live. And I think about the passage, I think it's Psalm 110, I believe, that talks about young people volunteering freely in the day of the Lord's power. It says they'll be dressed in holy garments and holy array. And Isaiah 60 about the light of God shining upon his people, and kings and leaders will come to their arising, and I believe there is this attractiveness to holiness and purity that the world is gravitating towards.
Yeah. I've been reading through the Sermon on the Mount recently, and kind of going over it multiple times and just realizing how radical Matthew 5, 6, and 7 are to actually embrace these things and to live these things out, how countercultural they are. And that's what it makes me think of. We're the salt of the earth, we're the light of the world. Things where there's a fragrance to our lives if we just do these basic things. That we're not even talking about sort of, even like bold evangelism necessarily, but we're just talking about just living in ways that are loving and forgiving and humble.
And,
where we care for each other, and those kinds of things that are actually radical in a culture that's very self-centered and self-serving. And
yeah, exactly.
I think it sticks out. And so, I don't know what I understand with the millennial and Gen Z thing, I think millennials are very cause driven. They're very like, let's go change the world. And I'm kind of on the older end of that. But I think millennials seem to have been generally very excited to jump into, like you said, some big conferences. We're going to go do something exciting. And I do think there's, in some ways, more of a cautiousness to the emerging generation. But I think there's a depth there too in some of the Gen Z, where there's going to be maybe a slower commitment, but a deeper commitment.
Yeah, that's good.
To these things. And so I think we just got to figure out how to navigate it. But like you said, the Bible works, the gospel works regardless.
Yeah.
And so we want to get to know people and love them, but at the same time, there's these things that stay true regardless.
That's so good. That's so good.
Well, maybe we can change gears here for a last question or two. So if, you're still a relatively young leader, but if you could go back to Niko in high school or Chuan, maybe freshman year of college, have any thoughts on what you would go back and tell yourself to do? Is there anything you can look back on your journey and you go, oh man, I'm really glad I did this? And maybe something where you look back and go, oh man, I really, I wish I had done this a little bit differently.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. Well, one thing that I'm glad is that I was just being very intentional, surrounding myself with a lot of amazing people, that has been able to just speak life and encouragement to me, and just being just really a prophetic community, encouraging. Something that I will tell myself, an advice I would give myself is, I'll say to evaluate your failures well. And because I feel there's a lot of moments of failure, and in life that I just moved on and not evaluate it, and learn from it. And there's something in my life now that I'm very, very much learning the significance of, like, hey, like, these are areas you fail, evaluate it, why, what could be done differently. And and just taking those times and those moments to do that, and don't repeat it. Yeah.
That's good. That can be hard sometimes for a driven leader who just wants to keep pressing on.
Yeah.
Stop and have those moments of reflection.
Yeah, it's true.
So gathered yourself around, or had people gathered around you that were encouraging. It's amazing how much difference that makes, isn't it?
Yeah. Pat talked about, surround yourself with a multitude of counsel, and there's certain things in my life that I want to cultivate, and I just find people who really carries those cultures really well, and just be intentional in being around them, and letting some of that rub off on me. So
awesome. Good. I feel like this was kind of like a good leadership episode. Hopefully it's relevant for that. So Niko, for people that want to connect with you or Ignite Movement that you're a part of, just how can people do that?
Yeah, you guys can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Ignite MVMT, Ignite Movement on Facebook. Our website is ignitemvmt.com, and you can find all of our information about gatherings and trainings and all that type of stuff. So
awesome. Cool. And I'll put all that in the links in the show notes also. Cool. Niko, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. Love you too, bro.